Good morning, everyone. This morning, I would like to introduce um, our workshop for the morning first session, which is Keep It Basic, Preventing Violence with the Basics in Lebanon Valley. This is Michael Ritter, and I'm going to hand it over to him, but if anybody has any questions, we'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A. So feel free to just try to remember to put your questions in the Q&A for Mike, and we'll get things started. You can go ahead, Mike.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I wish I could see your faces, but I hope that you can see mine at least, as well as our PowerPoint presentation today. I am the Deputy Director of Domestic Violence Intervention of Lebanon County, and as part of that role, I'm very pleased to be able to serve as one of the founders and leaders of the Basics Lebanon Valley, which is which we're going to learn is a huge initiative that we've started here in Lebanon County as part of our Connected Together Lebanon County group, which is our trauma-informed communities work group in Lebanon County. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint kind of down in the typical view, just for my sake. It's a little bit easier for me to manage things when it's not in slideshow mode. But our agenda for today is I'm going to talk through a little bit about Connected Together. And then we're going to talk specifically about the basics and why the basics. What are the basics? I'm actually going to talk a little bit also about where are we doing the basics and why that's important. And then we're going to talk through or give you some ways to think about how you might be able to share the basics in your work or in the community where you live, work, or play. So Connected Together. This is initially an initiative that started under a different group called Better Together. So it's partly why we called it Connected Together. But we now sit under the Community Health Council of Lebanon County. And this group strives to heal and prevent trauma by connecting community members to each other in meaningful, healthy relationships, both professional and personal. And that's really the core of why we call this group and this work Connected Together, because when we look at the research around trauma and resilience, and more importantly, ending trauma or preventing trauma or healing from trauma, as well as promoting resilience, what is at the foundation of that is healthy relationships. And not just intimate partnerships, but healthy relationships of all kinds across communities. And so ultimately our vision is we want to see kindness as a way of life. We want kindness to always be the first and foremost choice that people make when they interact in relationships with other people. So what informs our approach for Connected Together broadly? Well, when we look around other communities doing trauma-informed communities work, they're doing good work, but I might argue that it's kind of an intervention sort of approach. And what we've tried to do is really utilize a prevention lens. So for Connected Together in particular, we use this pair of aces tree model that you see on the screen now. And now I wish we could take credit for this, but we can't. This was actually developed by, I believe they're calling themselves now the Center for Community Resilience down at the Milken School of Public Health at GW University in Washington, DC. So the way they sort of describe addressing ACEs, or to use a prevention lens, is this pair of ACEs tree model. So we start at the top. Our first ACE is adverse childhood experiences. So we're all probably pretty familiar with what those represent. And the idea here is that typically what we do as service providers or as a social service sector is we develop programs and offer services from kind of a reactive intervention approach to address things like ACEs, right? And the branches of the tree, the fruit, the leaves of the tree are really what represent the aces. But when we prune trees back, essentially what happens over time is they grow and strengthen and thrive, actually, right? That's why we prune trees, so they grow bigger and stronger. And so while having some reactive intervention approaches can be helpful in helping people find repair and healing from traumatic experiences and are necessary and have a place, if we really want to talk about ending and preventing ACEs, then what we have to do is get to the second pair of ACEs, which is adverse community environments. And this is the soil the tree sits in. So when we really want to alter the health of a tree, we have to change the soil that it sits in, okay? And so here we have to address things like poverty and discrimination and housing quality and all forms of violence, right? And we kind of know all of these things. There's shared risk factors as well as shared protective factors across types of violence. We also need to address things like social capital and economic opportunities in our communities. So this is largely what informs our approach as Connected Together. Within this framework, one of our broad strategies is the basics. I'm very proud to say that Lebanon County, or what we're calling Lebanon Valley, was the first community in all of Pennsylvania to join what's called the Basics Learning Network. We are not the only ones, I'm very pleased to say, but we were the first. And this actually happened technically right before the pandemic hit. And then we kind of launched and implemented some things during the pandemic, which you can imagine has been a little bit difficult in this regard. Okay. And we really see this as a tool and a strategy to build on our vision of kindness as a way of life. There's a variety of partners that we have at this table. And essentially the Basics Learning Network is now an international network of about 50 communities that are piloting and implementing the basics in their communities. Most of them are probably up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States, but we also have like Tasmania, Australia, and some communities in Brazil and others internationally that have caught wind of this. And so it's one of these things where the basics is not necessarily a complete product at this point, but through all these communities participating together in tandem in this network, and we communicate with each other all the time through various formats, we're sort of perfecting the basics at the street level. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to the basics so we all know what I'm kind of talking about. Essentially, it's 5 principles that every parent and caregiver with young children and the adults around them can do to support our young children. So bear with me here. I'm going to pull down the PowerPoint for a second, and we're going to pull up the video.
Learning begins the moment your child is born. Every child is filled with vast potential for success in life. And those first 3 years can have the greatest impact on your child's learning.
Wheels. Push this. And they'll spin. Ooh.
Wow. Awesome job.
It's all about giving a child a proper start. That's what being a parent is all about.
Lo estás haciendo, amor, lo haces.
I wanted to make sure that I was here every day. Such a joy.
Every parent of every background can make a positive difference in their child's life.
It's peeling. Oh.
A few simple, everyday activities can make a big difference. That's why The Basics is working with research and community leaders to promote an important new initiative.
2. Good job. 3.
The Basics are 5 simple principles that we want everyone to know. The first of the basics is to maximize love and manage stress. The second is to talk, sing, and point.
Let's take a bath. A lovely, bubbly bath.
The third is to count, group, and compare.
1, 2, 3.
The fourth is to encourage and enable movement in space and play. And the fifth is to read, but not just to read. We want to read and discuss stories.
Whoa, what is that? A duck. What does the duck sound like?
These are the 5 fun and simple things that every parent can do beginning from birth.
Can you stack it? Orange and a yellow.
Let's all work together to make sure our children can become the best, most well-prepared they can possibly be.
Maximize love.
And manage stress.
Talk, sing,
and point. Count, group,
Y compare.
Explore through
movement and play.
Read and discuss stories. Please join us and help spread the word.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint then. And let's dig in a little bit now to sort of why the basics. Why are we at this point where a group at Harvard University is putting out this community-wide program? So bear with me, we're going to go through a little bit of brain research here. But when we look at what we see here on the screen, researchers have in the last few years really identified that 80% of brain growth happens in the first 3 years of life. That's an intensive amount of brain development in such a short period of time. And so if you look at the image on the right side of the slide, I have a colleague here locally who says, this is my favorite baby picture. Okay, that's what she says. And what we can see here is these various black lines represent brain cells or neurons. And so we see that as a newborn, there's very few connections between them. But even at 1 month, we start to see how these brain cells grow in size and in connection and in number. Okay, by the time we get to 9 months, we see a huge amount of growth. And then 2 years, even more growth. And then you probably notice that the pictures from 2 years to adult don't really look all that different. And this is really indicative of the fact that we've hit 80% of our brain growth in the first 3 years. Okay. What research has also identified for us is that there are developmental skill gaps by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status that we can identify by age 2. So long before kids ever even enter formal education in our country, some kids are already behind before they even enter preschool. Why is that? Well, we know there's a lot more to it than what we're going to share here, but a big piece of this comes from research done by Hart and Risley. And they've identified that advantaged children in the United States typically hear as many as 30 million more words by the age of 3 than children who come from families that are receiving public assistance. Okay, and you can kind of see the differences in the graph there toward the bottom between professional families, working class families, and low income families. So this is basically to say that young children living in financially better off homes overall are hearing a lot more language, a lot more words in those first 3 years of life. And that's an important piece to really developing that 80% of brain growth. But more than this, the research has also shown that it's not just about the quantity of words and language. It's also about the quality of those words and the quality of interactions. Okay. And so what we also see is that in families that are better off financially, not only are they speaking more to the children in that house, but what they're saying is more likely to be words of praise, words of nurture, and other types of positive words and interactions. Whereas kids who are in families that are financially struggling in some way are more likely to hear things like reprimands, warnings, or to be scolded. Okay, so again, it's not just the quantity of words, it's also the quality of those words. And if we connect this to the 80% of brain growth, this is a lot of that story, right? So kids that are hearing things that are positive and they're hearing a lot of words, they're more likely to be able to develop language skills. And that really sets them up then for formal education. So here we talked about already how kids have identified achievement gaps from an early age. So we kind of see that represented here by this graph. So cognitive skills on the axis going vertically and then age across the bottom. And we can see here at age 2, we already have a noticeable gap. Right, that top line represents the kids from the better off families, and that lower curved line represents kids from minority households or underprivileged households, financially struggling households. Okay, so even by age 2, we can identify that, and we see by the time we get kids to be age 17, there's a difference of about 3 to 4 years worth of learning, right? So at 17, the underprivileged kids are about 3 to 4 years of learning behind their peers from wealthier families. Okay, so really Harvard, and this is coming out of the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard, and the gentleman you saw in the video, Ron Ferguson, is an economics professor at Harvard. And you might wonder, well, okay, maybe this makes sense from sort of an economic standpoint, right? So the way Harvard's kind of approaching the basics here is from an economic perspective, right? By addressing the language issues and the interaction issues in families with young children, they're seeking to close the achievement gap, right? And so when we have good language in homes and praise and other things that come out in these 5 basics principles, kids develop cognitive skills, right? And they develop a love of learning, and they carry these into formal education when they're 5, 6, 7 years old, right? That gets reinforced by the school system, and they carry this forward into their adult lives and ultimately then into the workforce. Okay, so it makes sense from an economic perspective. But let's go to the next slide and we'll see kind of where we are looking at this in Lebanon County, okay? Because it's not just about the economic perspective here. There are other benefits that come out of this from those first 3 years of life. So we're gonna watch a 2-minute clip from Harvard, another part of Harvard, the Center on the Developing Child. And this video is going to explain to us how experiences build brain architecture.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Okay, so hopefully what we sort of took away from that video is what we see now here on the screen is that caregiving builds brains, right? So our brain pathways, our neurons, right? When we saw that baby picture, right, of those brain neurons, those pathways are built and strengthened through interactions that are loving, stimulating, that follow a child's interests, and that go back and forth or do what researchers call serve and return, okay? And so whereas there is, yes, an economic argument and perspective here with the basics principles, there's also a relational aspect as well. And that's where we're really interested in it in Lebanon County, is because by doing the basics principles, we are not just building the cognitive skills, but we're also building and enhancing secure parent-child relationships. And that serves as a foundation for those children to have social emotional skills. So things like empathy, things like a sense of morality, things like being able to effectively solve problems with their peers and other people around them. And these social emotional skills then serve as the foundation for them to have healthy relationships, healthy friendships, healthy intimate partnerships, healthy work relationships as they age. And so we really see this as a prevention tool, right? So even by enhancing secure parent-child relationships, the basics principles are a tool for us to prevent things like child abuse and domestic violence and intimate partner violence in our homes and in our communities. So let's go into a little bit more detail. We've already kind of introduced you to the 5 basics principles in that video clip earlier, but let's take a little bit more in-depth look at them. So on the right-hand side here, we have the 5 basics principles. Basically, they're heading. So again, they're maximize love, manage stress. I argue that's the most important one right there, especially when we're talking about ending and preventing and healing from things like trauma, all kinds of trauma, right? We want to maximize love and manage stress of parents, of caregivers, and other people in the community, right? And I think over the last 18 months or so, we've all been really stressed out, right? And that may be coming out in some of the types of interactions we see in our communities. So there's ways that we can maximize love and manage stress. So that's a big, big thing, because I think that one speaks not just to the cognitive skills, but really speaks to the relational and attachment skills as well. But then we also have toxin and point. count, group, and compare, explore through movement and play, and read and discuss stories. So there are 5 fun, simple, and powerful ways to give every child a strong start. All right. And what Harvard's basically done is take all this childhood education, childhood development research, and boilerplated it down to these 5 principles, right? So that ultimately they encompass most of what experts say is important for development from birth to age 3. Okay. Now you might be wondering, and I know I've had this conversation with folks along the way, and they said, well, gosh, this is like a no-brainer, right? Like a lot of people I know are already doing things like this, and that's a fantastic thing. What we want to do with the basics implementation is to basically take parents and caregivers who are already essentially doing the good work of basics principles. They're not probably calling it that, right? But they're essentially doing these things. And what we want to do is help them to understand why these things are so important, to maybe enhance what they're doing, bring a little bit more intention to it, right? And also to understand too, and I like the way that Ron Ferguson put this when we first met with him. He's like, you can't do the basics too much, right? We usually have the saying like too much of a good thing. This is a good thing, but you can't do too much of it, okay? And helping those parents to really understand that. We also then want to find and identify and work and support families who are struggling, right? And find ways that we can support and encourage them to integrate basics principles into their daily parenting routines. Okay. So it's a broad strategy, but we want people ultimately to understand that there's reasons why we do these things, and they're good things, and they benefit the brain growth of our kids, and that sets them up for not only those economic and cognitive benefits, but those relational benefits as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up a poll. I'm going to pull this down for a second and give you all an opportunity to vote on which basics principle video you would like to specifically watch at this time. So we watched the overview video, but then each basics principle comes with its own specific video. So there's 6 videos overall. So we'll launch the poll and give you all an opportunity to say which one you'd like to watch now. Okay. Give it just another few seconds. Okay. Not seeing any more movement, so I'll assume we could probably close the poll down. And on my end, I am seeing that there's a pretty clear winner of explore through movement and play. So give me 1 second to get that set up. And we will watch that one now. And then you can always go to our local website for the basics, or you can go to the Harvard site and you can find all the other videos as well. Just give me 1 second here.
How do children learn to explore?
Yes, go, 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 go. Good job.
Physical activity, exploration, and play are important for many reasons. One is the development of coordinated, strong, and healthy bodies. Another is that physical activities exercise the mind just as much as the body. The youngest children learn by touching, reaching, grasping, and experimenting on their surroundings. Each new phase of physical development brings new opportunities for learning and development.
How did you think about letting her start to explore?
Oh, she had to run in the house. This whole first floor was hers. So we just, let her just explore. I will get down there together and crawl with her.
There are simple ways to support the movements that babies make.
Hey, pretty girl. You're so pretty.
One is to make sure that they spend some time on their stomach every day. This is called tummy time. During tummy time, babies raise their heads and make crawling motions. Gradually, their upper body gets stronger until they can actually crawl. Tummy time also gives them a new view of their surroundings. Once children develop more mobility, you can find activities where they can move around more.
We don't hover over her. We like to watch her explore her surroundings and do her own thing because we feel like she learns a lot better that way.
If she climbs over things and go down the slides, if she falls, she's learning, and that's a good thing.
If children are working through something, it can be tempting to jump in quickly and show them the answer.
Whoa, cool balance.
But it's better to stand back and give them a little time to figure it out. Give them a chance first.
Here's go!
They can explore and see how things work for themselves and build that confidence and build that resilience.
They'll be developing coordination and problem-solving skills at the same time.
Good job, baby.
There's a row of about, 10, 11 U-shaped bike racks. Right. And she decided to walk under all of them. And then the last one, she decided to hang from it. And I hadn't seen her do that before.
Right.
So I believe she was testing her limits on that. I believe she's getting more confidence physically.
So don't underestimate the value of play.
She loves to explore and run around and touch things, and she feels confident doing that because she knows that we won't let anything bad happen to her. You found me!
Step back and watch where your child's curiosity takes them. Young children are like scientists, and you can cultivate their interest in the world by enabling exploration. Watch them, and you will learn about the things that they are interested in and the very interesting people they are becoming. How do you encourage exploration through movement and play? Which of your family members and friends should also see this video? Please join us and help spread the word.
So before I pull the PowerPoint back up, I did notice a question was thrown into the chat, which I addressed in the chat, but just to have it out in the verbal space as well. And that was, what's the website for the videos? So we do have a local website for Connected Together, and you see that, put that in the chat box, but it's also been branded into our videos here. So you see connectedtogetherlebco.com, and you can find out about the other initiatives that we're implementing around trauma-informed communities work as well on that site. And then there's also the sort of national/international site out of Harvard. That's just thebasics.org. And there you can find the videos as well, but you can also find, links to documents about the research behind the basics and a bunch of other things that are going on. You can find a list of all the communities participating in the Basics Learning Network and a variety of other things, resources and handouts and flyers and downloadable things that you can print and share and have them in multiple languages. We also have on our Connected Together site the videos posted in Spanish as well. So we were fortunate enough, thank you to PCADV, to receive some funding where we spent part of that money to locally brand our initiative. So that's the one brand that you see there, the videos connected together, lebco.com. The first is at the front end of the video clips where you see the basics Lebanon Valley. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint then. So at this time, we'll use the chat box and give folks an opportunity to reflect. What have you learned so far? What will you share about the basics? And what reactions or questions do you have at this stage of the game? So what are we thinking about? What are we reflecting on? What do we need more information or clarification about? Okay. I'm seeing nothing come through the chat, so I'm going to take that as a sign that we have no needs or questions at this stage of the game. So I will, okay. Never mind, I see it coming in now. Suzanne shares that I learned about an awesome crime prevention tool. I will share the videos. Are there written materials to share with other service providers? There are. We have a couple of the downloadables available on our Connected Together website. So like, what are the 5 basics principles essentially? But if you go to the national site, thebasics.org, you can find a whole wealth of downloadable materials, the video clips. There's things for parents, there's things for professionals. You can find a whole slew of things around that. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you, Lisa. Everything's been very clear. Jamie says no questions, but I like the videos and will like to use them with others. And certainly, by all means, that's why they're available for use. There's nothing, the whole idea is, Harvard is gifting this out into the community. In fact, interesting story, we learned that when Harvard first came out with the basics, they called it the Boston Basics. That makes sense. And they were just trying to figure out how to perfect it in Boston. And somehow Chattahoochee, Tennessee caught wind that they were doing this and was really excited about it and reached out and said, how do we get this product? And Harvard said, well, we're not there yet. And Chattahoochee said, well, we'll help you. And thus began the Basics Learning Network. So we're all still trying to figure this thing out and make it work well and effectively at the community level. All right, so I think we seem to be doing well. Let's continue to move forward then. So what's the approach then? So we have the principles, okay, but it's not enough just to have the principles for the sake of having the principles. All right, so the idea here is what we want to do is saturate the community with basics messaging. Okay, that's the key word there, saturate. All right, so we want to make life the program. We want the basics to be common vernacular. We want it to be something that's embedded into daily family interactions and routines. Okay, so we have to help families experience positive reinforcements from every direction for doing the basics. It's not enough just to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, caregiver, do the basics, right? We know it's not going to stick that way. We've got to saturate the community and have a series of supports around parents and caregivers in order for it to really be owned. So because it's Harvard, they like wonky terms. So they call this socioecological saturation. All right. So here we have a caregiver with a young child, birth to age 3 now. They are working on upping this to age 5, but we're really focused right now on the first 3 years of life. So we have a caregiver and child, and we have all these different sectors, right, in a community that surround this caregiver and child. So the idea here is with socioecological saturation is anywhere this caregiver with the small child goes in the community, we want there to be some kind of basics touch point. Okay, touch point might be a flyer or a poster hanging in a lobby. It might be a video playing on a monitor, like some of the videos you're watching here this morning. Or if we go up the spectrum of intensity, it might be businesses and nonprofits and doctors being very intentional to talk to this caregiver about basics principles, right? And to reinforce those messages. So some partners are very obvious and make a lot of sense. Things like schools and doctors and childcare centers and libraries, okay? So one of the things that we've done to raise awareness in our communities, we partnered with the library for their Smart Start story time over the summer. We used part of our grant money to support that. And they used that existing program and injected basics messaging into it. So the books that they used and read and the material that they gave out were basics focused, okay? Bringing some intention to it. It makes sense, right? We're not necessarily trying to create new things. What we're trying to do is take what exists and support the structure in injecting and being intentional about the basics. So I also like to think of, as an example, maybe a less obvious partner. So a coffee shop, for example. So you can go to a local coffee shop and ask them to not just hang a flyer on the wall. That's great, but it's passive. How can they be really active and direct with incorporating the basics? Well, imagine this caregiver with a young child comes in, okay? Caregiver's in for a coffee. The child just sits kind of standing there waiting around, right? But notices the giant muffins in the container, right? And says, ooh, muffin, right? How do we get then that business to really be intentional about training and learning their staff, right? So maybe it's a 19-year-old barista who's on making coffee that day, right? Have that barista know that, oh, when the child says that, they can inject a basics principle and say, ooh, yeah, you're right. That's a big muffin, right? Or yes, that's a blueberry muffin. Or can you count how many muffins are in the case, right? So this is the process that we're trying to embark on now. Is we've identified in Lebanon County a variety of potential partners. What we want to do is now ask them a specific tailored request. Okay, so it's not just, hey, hang up a flyer, but how can we be really intentional about it? So now in Lebanon County, where are we implementing the basics? And you have to bear with me here for a little bit because there's a rhyme and a reason to this decision. And what largely has driven this decision is ALICE data. If you are a Pennsylvania service provider and you're not familiar with ALICE, I highly recommend you become familiar with it. It's a data set that's put out by the United Way of Pennsylvania. You can just go to unitedforalice.org, I think, or search for the United Way of Pennsylvania, ALICE. So ALICE is an acronym. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So ALICE represents across Pennsylvania the 27% of Pennsylvanians who work but struggle to survive. So that's a quarter of people in our state, okay, who essentially we could classify as quote unquote working poor. Because ALICE folks earn above federal poverty level, but they still make less than what is needed for them to afford basic essentials in their community, okay? So that is to say, basically, because they are above federal poverty level, they often earn too much money to qualify for government assistance, okay? But there's also, on the flip side, no room in their family budget for emergency expenses. These are the folks that are one paycheck away from bankruptcy or homelessness, right? But they make too much to earn benefits. So let's look at what this looks like a little bit in Lebanon County. So, and I apologize for the quality of some of these images, but I had to kind of finagle a little bit. So what we see here is our rates of poverty and ALICE households over time. We start in 2010, we end in 2018. The blue boxes at the bottom represent households living under the federal poverty line. We see over the last decade that's remained relatively stable at about 10%. What's changed, though, is our number of ALICE households. We see that that's gone up from 20% to 27%. And we see in the white parts of the columns then a corresponding decrease in the percentage of families that are financially secure. Okay, so our ALICE households are trending upward. What we also see in our Lebanon County data is families with children are at a high risk here. So if we look at the right-hand column, we see this is our senior population. This is our highest percentage of households that are living what's called below the ALICE threshold. So the ALICE threshold is the combination of households living in poverty plus the households that are still struggling to meet those basic needs. Okay, so it's a combination of those two factors. So our seniors are the worst off in terms of ALICE overall. But when we look at the middle column, which is families with children, they're actually at greater risk of living under federal poverty line, right? So we have 2,200 households, families with children, that are living in poverty in our county, on top of the 2,800 additional working poor families that are financially insecure, therefore overall representing the second largest at-risk population when it comes to ALICE. So let's go a little bit further then. Welcome to Lebanon County, okay? We're connected together, and with the basics in particular, is focusing on these 4 municipalities, okay? Because these represent the municipalities that have the greatest percentage of households living under that ALICE threshold. Now, if you're familiar with Lebanon County at all, it probably doesn't surprise you to know that Lebanon City leads the pack with 60% of households that are living under the ALICE threshold. These are households that are, again, either financially insecure or living under federal poverty. Okay. But we also have some of these outlying municipalities as well that are also important. So Myerstown Borough out in the east and Palmyra Borough, which is very close to Hershey, both sitting at 48%, sort of in that second place spot. And then Anvil Township, kind of a few miles west of Lebanon City, sitting at 46%. Okay. Now, specifically, we've started with the rollout during 2020 in Anvil Township. And there's a variety of other reasons for that. It might make sense just looking at this screen to do Lebanon City, but there's other reasons why we picked Anvil to start. So Anvil Township, one of the things, it's very small. It's literally 1.3 square miles in size. That's it, okay? It's also very concentrated, okay? So there's a strong and concentrated business corridor, right? I didn't notice, if I go back to this map, Palmyra, Anvil, Lebanon, Myerstown, you can kind of see, you can kind of draw a line from one to the next to the other, right? And you see some of the municipality lines, right? That line loosely represents Route 422. So all these communities sit right on the 422 corridor. But Anvil's very kind of flat, right? So it's very collapsed around 422 specifically. So there's a lot of businesses in Anvil, but they're all right on 422. So it's, in a way, it's small and it feels more manageable that way. And there's a concentration then potentially of basics messaging across the community. Okay. Anvil also has Lebanon Valley College, which just recently has come on board as being a potential partner for us, and we're excited about that. It also opens us up to having access to college students who are looking for internships and other kinds of experiences. And Lebanon Valley College is it's very well known for music, but it also has a very strong education program. We also have Anvil Cleona School District. Okay. That may not seem like such a big deal, but again, because Anvil is so small and compact, so is the school district, right? So it's literally Anvil Township and Cleona Borough, which is right next door. Something like Northern Lebanon School District has a much greater geography that it covers. So again, Anvil Cleona covers a very small geography. It's more compact. We also know that from the data that 1/3 of students in this school district qualify for free or reduced lunch. So that's a pretty substantial number. And as we were rolling out the basics, we also learned that Anvil Cleona School District has an existing First 10 initiative. I don't have time to go into what that entails and what that means, but you can always Google First 10 and learn more about that. But it's one of these things that just intimately ties in nicely with the basics. So there's kind of this existing infrastructure. Data also tells us that a high percentage of uninsured and underinsured families live in and immediately around Anvil Township. Okay, so all of these things and the ALICE data, right? We can tie that back to that data I shared at the beginning about language in the home, right? So what we can kind of argue is that Anvil Township is small, but it also has maybe a higher concentration of households that are at risk of having young children who are not experiencing broad array of language, and then probably not experiencing quality language, right? So we're making this logical assumption or conclusion based off of the data that we have. More specifically, though, here we also had 2 very public and very serious child abuse cases that came out of Anvil Township within 6 months of each other during 2020. And so it really felt like this was a community that needed something, right? This is again, a small community. In a lot of ways, people feel Anvil's idyllic and bad things don't necessarily happen. And this just kind of ripped that veil off. And it was very visceral reaction from the community. It really cut deep and hurt deep a lot of people in that community. And so what we wanted to do was position the basics as a way of saying, okay, this maybe doesn't help us heal or repair from the trauma that's already happened, but it sets us up to have something in place to prevent these kinds of things from happening again going forward. So that's why Anvil specifically. We've also done a little bit of work in Lebanon City because they also have a First 10 initiative at their school district. And we haven't gotten to the other 2 yet. So some ways that we can kind of share the basics in our work or in our lives, in our communities. And we've kind of touched on some of these already. So you can go to thebasics.org/community toolkit, and you can get all these downloadable things you can print and share and all that stuff. Okay. There's also videos. There's tip sheets and other handouts. There's workshop and activity guides. And one of the things we've done here locally is we've incorporated basics principles into a parenting class that both DVI and Lebanon Family Health Services co-facilitate. So we've incorporated the basics into that as well. Okay, you can find, again, the research on the basics and other things. There's also another aspect of the basics that we're very interested in. We haven't built the capacity or the infrastructure yet to be successful with it, but it's called Basics Insights Text Service, or what I lovingly refer to as just BITS. It's just easier to say that. And what this is it's a texting service that we want parents and caregivers of young children to sign up for. And it does a couple of things for us. The first thing it does is it serves as additional regular touch point of basics messaging. So a parent signs up, they get 2 texts every week. The early text in the week is about a basics principle broadly, sort of describes it. The follow-up text then later in the week uses the same principle, but now offers up a tangible way that the parent can incorporate it into a daily routine. Okay, so it's fresh on their minds. The second thing we get from BITS is evaluation. The parent signs up, they provide some basic baseline information, and then the system prompts them to fill out at regular intervals a follow-up survey. And ultimately, the idea here is we want to track how active people are with the basics. Are they using the tips, right? How are their behaviors or attitudes about basics and caregiving changing over time because of this program, right? So it's a very big way to support the messaging, but also get some feedback from the messaging as well. And then we, of course, support this in other more passive ways out in the community with the flyers and the videos, etc. Okay. So what we can do as a driver of this, as well as other folks who are excited about it and want to do something about it, we can display posters and materials. We can show those videos. Okay, we can discuss, model, and practice with caregivers during one-on-one meetings, like medical visits or meeting with a case manager, right, a therapist, and in group sessions like workshops or playgroups or community events. Okay, so again, we have these passive ways, but we have these very direct and active ways that we're looking to get people to get involved. And of course, you can put things on social media and other communication channels and anything else that you can think of. And I'm pretty sure with the materials that will be put out for this session, we've included a handout or two with some ideas on how you can begin to incorporate basics principles. And again, this stuff's available, some of it on our website, all of it on the national site, and you can use it. You don't necessarily need to be a part of the Basics Learning Network, but it's very meaningful to be a part of the network because we meet monthly on Zoom and learn from each other, right? And it's like, oh, we're thinking about creating this kind of document because we think this would be useful for our community. And that community over there says, we already did that. Here you go, right? Change it, make it work for your community, but you have this basic structure already in place. Okay, so we've now reached a point where we have another reflection here. So we'll go back to the chat box and see, consider how could the basic support or enhance the work that you're already doing around prevention or addressing violence, okay? Also, maybe you want to think about imagining it's a year from now and the basics has been a huge success in your organization or in your community. What will have been accomplished? What will it look like, right? What will it feel like? What were the steps we took to get there? And you might also think about what's one thing you want to try right away. So I think about this, and the timing of this is pretty neat in that we're entering the holiday season, okay? So in a lot of communities, or at least across South Central PA, trick or treat is tonight, okay? So that's a very kid-heavy type of event. And then Thanksgiving's coming up in a month, and probably a lot more people are going to get together this year than we did last year. So what might you be able to do in these moments, in these routines, to talk to someone about the basics or to inject the basics principle into a conversation? So we'll open up the chat box and see what thoughts we have. The one handout worksheet we have with this session also has a space on the one on the bottom of the back side, I believe, where you can kind of think through some of these things, some of these questions now. I know these are big questions to consider at 9:45 on a Thursday when you weren't expecting them. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come in, but we're really kind of at the end of our time here anyway. We really just have this one slide left about next steps and contact information. So again, here's our local website, connectedtogetherlebco.com. And again, you can learn not just about the basics there, but some of the other initiatives that we're doing to build positive, healthy connections in our community with the eye toward preventing and ending trauma and violence. You have my specific contact information there. You can send me an email if you have questions, okay? And, you know, maybe it's about, hey, how do we get be part of this basics learning network, right? Or if you just have other questions or things you think of later, you can contact me. You know, DVI's been at the beginning of the basics in Lebanon County. So it's been a couple of years we've been involved and probably have a pretty good handle on it. So if you have questions about it, we can probably answer them for you or get you connected to the broader network and the folks up at Harvard. You know, if we can't help you, they certainly can. So that's really what I wanted to cover with you all here this morning. So we can, of course, open the floor up in the chat for any further questions, comments, reflections, things that you need clarified, any other needs that we have at this moment in time. And if not, then we will gift back to you sometime this morning. So I'll go ahead and yield and see what comes into the chat box. Okay. I've seen some acknowledgement come through, so thank you. It's a great reminder to us all to pour love and quality time and attention into children. Great information to share, very interesting. Okay, here's a question. How do we advertise the program for parent participation? That's a good question. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We've been focusing a lot on raising awareness, just kind of broadly speaking, kind of getting people a little bit piqued and interested in it. And a lot of that is because of the pandemic, and it's been hard to do things with a lot of intent. It's also a matter of when we look at the Basics Insights text service, for example, specifically, we know, probably because broadly we just kind of know, but also because the learning network is, you know, folks who are a little bit further along than us have learned that to get people to sign up for the text service and to stick with it and to use it, it takes an intensive amount of capacity to do that, right? You can't just put a link out on a Facebook page and say, hey, parent, sign up for this. This is a great thing. You're going to get very little traction in that regard. So what we know we need to do is get with like the pediatricians and the daycare centers and the children's librarians and coach them and train them on the texting service, the basics more broadly, why this is important, why we're doing this, and what we want them to do, right? With a client of theirs or a patient of theirs coming in. How do I go about having this conversation and then transitioning that or transforming that conversation into a Basics Insights text service sign up, right? And then how do I follow up with this person? and check in with them to make sure they're using it. So it's this very intentional process, and it takes a lot of capacity on our part as service providers to make that successful and effective. And unfortunately, we've hit some barriers over the last 12 months or so that have kind of tripped us up, kept us from getting to that point. But that we're our eyes on the prize, and that's our prize. And we're going to get there. We're just trying to figure out some of the capacity pieces on the other end of things. So we decided what we would do in the meantime is just shift back to focusing a little bit more on raising additional awareness in the community. But instead of just like we did a billboard, for example, and instead of just like handing out flyers or posting flyers, we're actually working with Lebanon Valley College right now on hopefully being able to install a born learning trail type of thing. We won't call it born learning. It'll be basics branded, but something around on and around their campus to promote the basics principles in very active and intentional ways. So we're just looking to kind of deepen our awareness building at this point in time. But ultimately, the short answer to your question on advertising to parent participation is really being specific in our asks to our community partners who are working with parents of young children and coaching them through how to do that. I haven't seen anything else come in while I was blabbering there, so we'll give it just a few more seconds, see if anything else comes in. And I can probably pull the screen down here now. Okay, I've seen nothing else come in. So I'll assume that we've met your needs and answered your questions at this point in time. I'll just throw in the chat box here. So you have it in additional ways, my email. If you want to reach out later, or if you're like me, you probably think of something during lunchtime that it's like, oh shoot, why didn't I think of that at 9:45 this morning? You can email me then as well. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning, everybody.
And Mike, this is Betsy. Thanks so much for presenting today at Pathways. It's greatly appreciated. This was a great workshop.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, I guess if no one else has any questions, we can. Was there anything else you needed to say or post up here at all before we would end, Mike?
I don't think so. So we'll just gift you back 20 minutes of your morning.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.